Eco 121. Microeconomics. Study Session 1. The Nature, Scope of Economics. Introduction. Economics is defined by Professor Lionel Robbins in 1933, as the science, which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means, which has an alternative, uses. Economics is the study of those activities of human beings, which are concerned with the satisfaction of unlimited wants by using limited resources. Micro means the millionth part. The term micro has been taken from the Greek word mikros meaning small. Under microeconomics, we study the individual units like a consumer, a firm, an industry, price determination of a particular commodity. In short, microeconomics deals with the study of the economic problems of a single unit like a firm or small economic units or resource owners. The main objective of microeconomics is to study the principles, policies, and problems relating to the optimum allocation of resources. From the theoretical point of view, it tells us the functioning of a free enterprise economy. In this study session, you will learn about the basic economics concepts and the basic fundamental questions in economics and the price system. The basic economics concepts. Generally, economics is divided into microeconomics and macroeconomics. However, economics is the study of how people and society end up choosing, with or without the use of money, to employ scarce productive resources that could have alternative uses. In economics, the concept of scarcity is important because it calls for the need to allocate available resources among the alternative uses. Scarcity refers to limited in supply in relation to demand. For instance, the resources at the disposal of a student to satisfy his/her wants are limited. Scale of preference refers to a list of goods or services, which are to be satisfied with a given amount of resources. These are listed in their order of importance, according to satisfaction to be derived from them. Choice refers to selecting from a list of goods, services, and resources. Opportunity cost or real cost refers to a measure of foregone alternative. Basic economic questions. All societies, whether capitalist, socialist or communist, face four basic economic problems that confront people as individuals, firms, groups, or governments. These problems are: 1. What to produce. 2. How to produce. 3. For whom to produce. 4. How to use resources efficiently. The scope of microeconomics. Microeconomics refers to the study of the individual decision-making units, the households, resources owners, and business firms, the way in which their decisions interrelate to determine relative prices of goods and factors of production, and the quantities of these which will be bought and sold. It studies how resources are allocated to the production of particular goods and services, organization of production and distribution of the output, and how efficiently these are done. In all, it consists of the study of price theory and resource allocation, the theory of value, consumer theory of the firm, producer behavior, theory of distribution and welfare theory. The scope of microeconomics. Microeconomics deals mainly with the determination of relative prices and allocation of resources among competing ends under the conditions of full employment, in relation to the goal of each economic unit. The households always want to maximize their satisfaction by judiciously allocating their income to various units of consumption goods. Resource owner seeks to maximize his or her income received for supplying factor services to business firms. Business firms maximize profit. Excision units and their economic goals. In any economy, there are three categories of decision-making components. 1. Households or consumers. The households are groups that utilize the fund obtained from their labor services, transfer payments, rents, and other sources to purchase consumption goods and services for the satisfaction of their individual wants. 2. Resource owners. The resource owners are owners of factors of production. 3. Business firms or entrepreneurs. This group makes these factors available for use in production by business firms. Business firms are groups consisting of enterprises that utilize the services of other factors to undertake and carry out production activities. Study Session 2. Demand and Supply Analysis. Introduction. It is very important to note that the world is governed by demand and supply activities. Individuals in an economy make their desire known through their demand and supply of goods and services. However, An understanding of determinants of demand and supply will help to know how changes in demand and supply are generated. In this study session, you will learn about the concepts of demand and supply and the determinants of demand and supply. Concept of demand. Demand is the total goods and services an individual is willing to pay at a particular price at a particular time. There are different types of demand which are competitive, complementary, derived, and composite demand. Also, demand for goods can be looked at in terms of normal demand and abnormal demand. Type of demand. 1. Competitive demand. These are commodities, which can be substituted for one another. Examples are butter and margarine, rice and yam. 2. Joint or complementary demand. Joint demand occurs when two things are needed together to satisfy a particular want at the same time. Examples are motorcar and fuel, lecturers and students, pen and book. 3. Derived or circuitous demand. Certain commodities are wanted not for direct satisfaction but for what they will help to produce, which will give satisfaction later. Examples are the factor of production, which is demanded by the production of other items, which will be bought by others. For instance, the land is demanded planting yams, which will be demanded later. 4. Composite demand. This occurs when a commodity is demanded different purposes. For instance, palm oil is demanded to make soap or for lighting, for use in industries, or domestic cooking. Reasons for the law of demand. A. When the price of the commodity is very high, only the well-to-do can afford to buy it. This means that lower prices bring in new consumers, price effect. B. Each price reduction may encourage extra purchases by each of the goods consumers. For example, when the price of a tennis ball is higher, tennis ball is only played by professionals, but when the price is low, it can be played by amateurs as well. Substitution effect. C. Income effect. Lower prices mean higher real income, hence higher purchases, and vice versa. Individual versus market demand. Individual demand for goods and services refers to the number of goods and services to a particular person or individual who is willing and ready to purchase at a particular price, place, and time. Market demand, on the other hand, refers to the sum total conglomeration of all the other quantities of goods and services demanded by individuals in the market. Demand schedules. A demand schedule is a table, which shows the quantities of goods and services purchased at varying prices. In other words, it shows the definite relationship between the market price of goods and services and the quantity demanded of them. Demand schedules. The demand curve tells us how many units of the commodity consumers are willing to buy over a period of time at all possible prices of that commodity. The prices of all other commodities, the incomes of consumers, and tastes are all held constant, the ceteris paribus assumption. Quantity and price are inversely related, i.e. the lower the price, the greater the quantity demanded. In other words, quantity arises as price falls, so that the curve slopes downwards from the left to right. This property is called the law of downward sloping demand, and it holds for all normal goods. The law states that when the price of a commodity is increased at the same time that all other things are held constant, less of that commodity is demanded. Determinants of demand. 1. The price of the product. For normal goods, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and vice versa. 2. The level of consumers' income. Low-income earners prefer cheaper products, while high-income earners can afford expensive goods. The higher the income, the higher the number of goods purchased, all things being equal. 3. Tastes of consumers. The taste of consumers changes with time, and these influence the level of demand. Wig, which was popular with women many years back, was abandoned for perming of hair in the 1980s and early 1990s, but this resurfaced in the late 1990s. 4. Price of other products. For substitutes, complements, and derived goods, the price of one affects the other. For example, if the price of a substitute increase while the other remains constant, the demand for the latter increase. Demand for complementary goods falls with price increases. 5. Government policy. For goods, which are taxed higher, their demand falls due to higher prices. For subsidized ones, their demand rises due to lower prices. 6. Population. The higher the population, the higher the demand, especially for the basic needs of life: food, clothing, and shelter. Demand function is a technical or mathematical relationship between the quantities demanded of a commodity and its determinants or the factors influencing it. It can be stated thus: changes in quantity demanded. Movement along the demand curve. Change in quantity demanded. Movement along the demand curve. Extension or contraction of demand is caused by changes in the price of the product in question. Due to a rise in price from P0 to P1, demand has moved 4 meters Q0 to Q1, hence the movement along the demand curve from A to B. Change in demand, shifts in demand. These are referred to as shifts in demand, increase or decrease in demand. Shifts in demand are caused not by the changes in the commodity but by changes in the other factors. Shifts in demand could either be an increase or a decrease. Concept of supply. In economics, supply cannot be equated to the total quantity produced. Supply, in economies, refers to the number of goods and services that producers or suppliers are willing and ready to sell/bring to the market at a particular price, place, and time. Types of supply. A. Competitive supply. This occurs when some commodities supplied in the market have alternative uses. For instance, land could be used for farming or to build churches, schools, stadiums, etc. When land is used for any of the above, its supply for the use of others is reduced. Its supply for these is competitive because it could be competitively supplied for other uses as well. B. Joint supply. Some commodities can be supplied together from the same source. For instance, palm oil, palm kernel, baskets, brooms, etc. come from a palm tree. These are in joint supply. C. Composite supply. This occurs when many commodities can satisfy a particular want. When this occurs, the sum total of their supply is said to be composite. For instance, light or heat could be got from oil, electricity, coal, or gas. The law of supply. The law states that when the price of a commodity is increased same time that all other things are held constant, more of that commodity is supplied, and it holds for all normal goods. The reasons for the law of supply. 1. First, when the price of the commodity is very low, only a few suppliers can afford to supply. This means that higher prices bring in new suppliers/producers. 2. Secondly, each price increase may encourage extra production and supply by each of the goods suppliers. 3. That larger quantities are supplied at higher prices could be explained by the fact that cost tends to rise as the production of any commodity increases. If costs rise, producers will only increase supply if prices rise at the same time, otherwise supply will not be increased. Supply schedules. A supply schedule is a table, which shows the quantities of goods and services sold at varying prices. In other words, it shows the definite relationship between the market price of goods and services and the quantity. Supply curves. A supply curve is a graphical representation of a supply schedule. We also have individual and market supply curves. The supply curve tells us how many units of the commodity suppliers are willing to sell over a period of time at all possible prices of the commodity. The prices of all other commodities, the technology of producers, and tastes are all held constant, the ceteris paribus assumption. This property is called the law of upward sloping supply, and it holds for all normal goods. Determinants of supply. 1. The price of the product. For normal goods, the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied, and vice versa. 2. The price of other products. Since the aim of the firm is to maximize profits, if the prices of other products rise, indicating an increase in the profitability of selling them, then the firm may transfer some of its resources to produce them, thus reducing the supply of the original commodity. 3. The techniques of production. Improvements in techniques of production usually increase the number of goods produced. That is, if an important scientific or engineering breakthrough allows that capital or any other factor of production to be used more effectively, the number of goods supplied at any particular price increases. 4. The cost of factors of production. Ceteris paribus, the higher the costs of production, the lower the quantity demand, and vice versa. 5. Government action. Certain government actions affect supply. For example, if tax is imposed on a product, its price will rise, thus causing costs of production to rise, thereby reducing supply, unless otherwise covered by the price increases. 6. Weather. Some commodities are seasonal in character. Maize, for instance, cannot thrive without rain, hence its supply will be high during the rainy season. Changes in quantity supplied. Movement along with the supply curve / change in quantity supplied. Movement along the supply curve. Extension or contraction of supply is caused by changes in the price of the product in question. Due to a rise in price from P0 to P, supply has changed from Q to Q, hence the movement along the supply curve from C to D. Chance in supply, shifts in supply. Shifts in supply are caused not by the price changes in the commodity but by changes in the other factors. Shifts in supply could either be an increase or a decrease. Chance in supply, shifts in supply. The above figure illustrates an increase in supply from S0 to S1, a rightward shift in the supply curve. As can be observed, the price, PO, remained unchanged. The increase in supply could be caused by any or both of the following. A. Improvement in technology or techniques of production. B. A decrease in the prices of other commodities, leaving the commodity in question more profitable to produce. C. Decrease in the prices of factors of production used in producing the commodity. D. Changes in the goals of producers in favor of the commodity in question. The decrease in supply could be caused by any or both of the following. A. Increases in the prices of other commodities, leaving the one in question less profitable. B. Increases in the prices of factors of production used in producing this commodity. C. Changes in the goals or objectives of producers against this commodity. Study Session 3, Theory of Consumer Behavior Introduction. Subject to his or her income and wealth, the consumer decides on what assortment of goods and services to purchase. The concept of utility provides an important basis for determining the behavior of the consumer in terms of how he allocates his available resources among the various competing goods and services. Therefore, given the individual's income, the market price of various commodities, he will spend his money income to attain the highest satisfaction or utility maximization. The concept of the cardinal approach of utility theory. The Sardinalists, the proponents of cardinal utility, assume that different quantities of goods yield varying quantities of measurable, cardinal, utility to the consumer. That is, for any period of time, and with constant tastes, the preference of the consumer can be represented by a cardinal utility measure, which depends on the number of goods or services consumed. 1. The assumption is that utility can be measured or quantified in terms of monetary units. The cardinal utility theory of consumer behavior is based on the assumption that a. The consumer is rational, subject to his income and price. He spends his income in such a way that his utility is maximized. 2. The consumer has full knowledge of all relevant information for his choice of goods and services. He is completely aware of all the available alternatives, their prices, and his constraints. 3. He is able to compare the utilities from various commodity bundles. In other words, he is able to evaluate the various alternatives. 4. The utility derived from the consumption of successive units of any goods or services diminishes as more and more of such goods and services are being consumed. This is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Change in total utility as more of the good is consumed, declines continuously as more and more of a good is consumed. 5. Total utility of the consumer depends on the quantities of individual goods he consumed. The law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility explains the behavior of marginal utility as successive units of a commodity is consumed. According to the law, as the consumer purchases for his consumption additional units of any commodity, the marginal utility derived declines, that is, each successive unit adds to the total satisfaction than the previous one. Thus, the law states that ceteris paribus, the utility derived from successive units of t particular commodity diminishes, as the rate of consumption of the commodity, per unit of time, increases. Utility maximizing rule, income allocation and the consumer equilibrium. The operation of the law of diminishing marginal utility shows that a consumer who wishes to maximize his utility from a given income must not extend purchases of an Y commodity beyond the point at which purchases of other goods will yield greater utility. To maximize his utility, he must allocate his income in such a way that the marginal utility of a naira worth of the commodity is the same for all commodities. That is, marginal utility per naira worth of any commodity is equal to marginal utility per naira worth of any other commodity. We may ask the question, out of the various assortments of goods and services, which a consumer can obtain with his limited income, which particular combination maximizes his utility, or how does he select the one that maximizes his utility? Utility maximizing rule, income allocation and the consumer equilibrium. Under the assumption that the commodities purchased by the consumer are unrelated, His income should be allocated in such a way that the last naira spent on each commodity yields the same amount of satisfaction or utility. Thus, the utility maximizing rule is that if the consumer's income is spent on three commodities X1, X2, and X3, optimum satisfaction, utility, is achieved if the income is allocated such that MUX1 equals MUX2 equals MUX3, equation 1. PX1 PX2 PX3. At this point where marginal utilities of X1, X2, and X3 commodities purchased are proportional to their respective prices, the consumer is at equilibrium. In this position, the consumer will not be able to improve his welfare by reallocating his income. Since he is already enjoying maximum satisfaction, any reallocation of income will reduce the total utility, thus he has no incentive to switch expenditures. The concept of ordinal approach of utility theory. The ordinal utility approach to consumer behavior is based on the following basic assumptions. A. The consumer is rational, his objective is to maximize his utility with a given income and market prices. This assumption is based also on the assumption that he has full information of all relevant factors influencing his choice. B. Utility is ordinal, the consumer can set up preference ranking of the various combinations he prefers and which combinations he is indifferent to. C. The consumer's preferences are consistent or transitive. If he indicates that he prefers combination of goods A to combination B and combination B to combination C, then he must prefer combination A to combination C for the choice to be consistent. D. The consumer is not saturated with the consumption of any good. The consumer prefers a bigger bundle of commodities to a smaller bundle. E. The marginal rate of substitution of the commodities diminishes, indicating that the indifference curve portraying the consumer preferences is convex to the origin. Indifference schedule and indifference curve. An indifference schedule indicates the preferences of the consumer. Over to construct a simple hypothetical indifference schedule, we have to assume as usual a world of two goods X1 and X2. Goods indifference schedule is a table showing the various combinations of X1 and X2 which the consumer considers equivalent or among which he is indifferent. Thus, a set of combinations of X1 and X2 which yields the consumer the same total satisfaction is an indifference curve. Indifference schedule and indifference curve. Each of the combinations A, B, C, D, and E, in Table 1, and as plotted in Figure 2, is equally satisfactory to the consumer since they yield the same level of utility. In the commodity spaces X1 and X2, there are infinite combinations of X1 and X2 commodities each of which gives the same level of satisfaction. Study Session 4. Behavior of Producers. Introduction. Like the case of consumers, where we are inclined to say they seek to maximize their utility, by the same token, we can say generally also that the ultimate aim of producers is to maximize their profit from goods and services sold to society. It is important to note first that the ability of the producer to produce efficiently at the least possible cost will depend on the state of technology, the skills of the workforce, the size of the market, etc. In this study session, you will learn about the whole idea of the production function and the cost function. The production function. The production function refers to the physical relationship between a firm's input of resources and its output of goods and/or services per unit of time. Output can be increased or decreased by increasing or decreasing the input used. The output of a production process can be called returns. The production period can be in either the short or long run. In the short run, at least one factor of production is fixed, while in the long run, all factors vary. The cost function. Economists define the cost of production of a particular product as the value of the foregone alternative products that resources used in its production could have been produced. On the other hand, costs of resources to a firm are their values in their best alternative uses. This is called the alternative cost doctrine or the opportunity cost doctrine. The production made by any firm is made possible by the explicit cost incurred by the firm. The costs are the amount spent on the inputs used by the firm to produce output. The ability of the firm to produce output that will maximize profit will depend on how best the firm can combine the inputs, for example, labor and capital. Study Session 5. Market Structure. Introduction. An example of market structure is a market for goods, durables and non-durables. The market for services is like the labor market, also we have a market for financial items/services. But in this study session, You will learn about the structures in which available markets have been classed. Market structure, and its characteristics. When economists talk of the market structure, they are referring to the four major markets that are recognized in the literature of economics, which are perfect competitive market, monopoly market, monopolistic competitive market, and the oligopolistic markets. 1. Perfect market. This is the market where buyers and sellers are sufficiently small in relation to the entire market output. The market requires that resources are completely mobile. Also, it requires that consumers, firms, and resources owners have perfect knowledge of the relevant economic and technological data. In the short run, the firm maximizes its profit at the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost and the price must be greater than the average cost. In the long run, average cost is equal to the price of the product. 2. Monopoly market. This is a market that is dominated by a single seller who itself is the industry. Here there is a serious barrier to entry. In fewer developing countries, the government runs most monopolists. In the short run, they maximize their profit where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost and where the price or average revenue is higher than average cost. In the long run, they can still make super profits. Causes of monopoly. A. Legal barriers. Some monopolies are created by legal empowerment. For instance, private businesses that might want to compete with night law are prohibited from doing so by law. The legal rights, which may confer monopoly status on an economic agent, are of various forms, which include patents, copyrights, franchises, and licenses. B. Patents. To encourage inventiveness, the government of a country gives exclusive production rights, for a specified period of time, to the inventor of certain products. After this period of time, other producers can be allowed to undertake the production of these goods. C. Copyright. Copyrights, which are granted for a much longer period than patents, are applied to the creative works, such as artworks, authorship of a book, etc., of artists or authors. Copyrights could last for the owner's lifetime, or even up to 50 years after his/her death. This is designed to benefit the children of such artists or authors. For instance, the British government is recently reported as having decided to pay a huge amount of money to the family of the legendary Shakespeare as compensation for the use of his plays. 3. Oligopoly market. The oligopoly exists when the number of firms in the industry is very few, making each firm to take cognizance of the reactions of its rivals when formulating its price policy. The oligopolistic prices tend to be inflexible and sticky. It is a market where the firms collude to form a cartel. The profit-maximizing strategy is not certain, as there are many theories with diverse views on it. Due to the different reaction patterns of the other oligopolists to the actions of the first, and unless and until we assume a specific reaction pattern, we cannot define the demand curve faced by our oligopolists. In light of the foregoing, we do not have a general theory of oligopoly. All we have are specific cases or models. A. Carnot modi. This model assumes that 1. There are only two firms, A and B, selling a homogeneous good, one produced at zero cost. 2. The total market demand function for this good is given by a demand function, and 3. Firm A enters the market first, followed by firm B, but each always assumes in determining its best level of output, that the other will hold output constant. B. Edgeworth model. In the Edgeworth model, we assume the existence of two firms, A and B, selling a homogeneous good produced at zero cost. Under this model, these additional features hold. 1. Each firm faces an identical straight-line demand curve for its product. 2. Each firm has a limited production capacity and cannot supply the entire market by itself. 3. Each firm, in attempting to maximize its total revenue or profit, assumes that the other firm holds its price constant. See Chamberlain model. This model assumes/starts with the same basic assumptions as Carnot, but it is more realistic and assumes further that the duopolists do recognize their interdependence. The result is that without any form of agreement or collusion, the duopolists set identical prices, sell identical quantities and maximize their joint profits. D. The kink demand curve model or Sweezy model. This tries to explain the price rigidity often found/observed in oligopolist markets. Sweezy postulates that if an oligopolistic firm increases its price, others in the industry will not raise theirs and so the firm would lose most of its customers. On the other hand, an oligopolistic firm cannot increase its share of the market by lowering its price since the other oligopolists in the industry will match its price out. Thus there is a strong compulsion for the oligopolists not to change the prevailing price but rather to compete for a greater share of the market on the basis of quality, product design, advertisement, and service. E. The centralized cartel model. A cartel is a formal organization of producers within an industry that determines policies for all the firms in the cartel, with a view to increasing total profits for the cartel. There are many types of cartels. At one extreme is the cartel that makes all decisions for all member firms. This form of perfect collusion is called a centralized cartel. Characteristics of oligopoly. A. Few sellers. This is a market situation in which the number of sellers dealing in a homogeneous or differentiated product is small. Also called competition among the few when the sellers are few, each produces a considerable fraction of the total output of the industry and can have a noticeable effect on market conditions. B. Interdependence. In perfect competition, monopoly, and monopolistic competition, each firm is more or less independent of the other, although each is dependent on the market. C. Advertisement. The main reason for this mutual interdependence in decision-making is that one producer's fortunes are dependent on the policies and fortunes of the other producers in the industry. It is for this reason that oligopolist firms spend much on advertisement. Study Session 6. Factor Markets. Introduction. Factor markets refer to the markets for the basic factors of production, namely labor, capital, and land. The description of these markets will show the nature of the supply, demand, and pricing of the factors or ingredients of production. The pricing of factors refers to what each factor is paid for its contribution towards production. What each factor gets for participation in the production process indicates the nature of income distribution in the society concerned. For a clear understanding of this chapter, some important terms and concepts are defined as follows. Production, simply put, is the transformation of inputs, factors of production, in outputs, products, goods and services. Factor pricing. The demand for factors of production. The three basic factors of production are labor, capital, and land. They form the ingredients or inputs for the production of goods and services. Thus, the demand for factors of production represents the number of factors, which the producers are willing and able to purchase at a particular price and at specified moments of time and place. The producers, firms or business enterprises, will only demand a factor of production if there are demands for its products, goods, and services. To this extent, the demand for a factor of production is said to be a derived demand. The determinants of factor demand. 1. The demand for the products, goods and services, which the factor helps to produce. The more the demand for the commodities it helps to produce, the more the demand for the factor. 2. The nature of the factor demand curve. The factor demand curve is the graphical plot of the factor's demand schedule with respect to changing prices. It shows the various quantities of the particular factor that are demanded at varying prices of the factor, prices of all other factors remaining constant. 3. The marginal cost of the variable factor equals the marginal revenue product of that factor. If the profit-maximizing firm is a price taker, which means that it cannot influence the market price by either buying more or less of the factor, then the marginal cost of the variable factor is just the price of the factor P, and this will be equal to the marginal revenue product of the factor. Thus, P equals MRP. This implies that at equilibrium factors of production will receive a price, which is equal to the value of the marginal output resulting from hiring an additional unit of factor. Determinants of income distribution. The theory of income distribution states that each factor of production will earn its marginal product provided perfect competition operates in the factor markets. By implications, the wage rate paid to labor is simply the value of the additional output produced by the last worker hired, and so, the rent paid for land or the interest rate paid for the use of capital are the respective marginal contributions to output made by the last units employed. Many factors are responsible for variations in labor income receipts or distribution of income. Some of these factors are outlined below. A. Labor skills. Labor skills, intellectual and physical skills, are not equally the same in all individuals and hence, differences in income. B. Ownership of other factors. Income distribution may depend on the ownership of other factors such as land and capital. It has been shown that wealthier persons who own land and capital receive more income than those who do not have. C. Investment in human capital. Investment in human capital such as education, training, health, etc. has been found to determine income distribution among labor. On a general note, persons with better education or health will earn better than those with less of the two. D. Efforts in finding job. The efforts which people put in while looking for the job and while negotiating for their pay may also be an important factor in income distribution. The pricing of factors in competitive markets. Under competitive market models, The demand and supply curves determine the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. In like manner, the pricing of factors in competitive markets depends on the demand and supply curves. The equilibrium price and quantity are determined at a point where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded.